This is episode 23 of Hoops Forum, a production of Radius Athletics and a Quick Timeout podcast. I'm Tony Miller, and I'm joined once again by my co-host, Randy Sherman. Big thanks to 323 Sports for sponsoring Hoops Forum. It's that time of year when coaches and ADs are getting together their equipment and uniform orders for the fall. We would strongly suggest that you give a look to 323 Sports. They can really do it all for your athletic program. To find out more about their services, visit 323sports.com, or you can contact a rep at sales at 323sports.com. They'll be sure to do it right for your sports program. We're at episode 5 in our series here on cognitive biases. We'll be wrapping up this series here today. If by chance you missed any of the earlier discussions, you can always go back and watch those on the Radius Athletics YouTube page or listen to them by searching a Quick Timeout podcast. Today, though, we're going to be talking action bias, and you'll also see how some of these can be wrapped in to the other biases that we've been talking about as well. Randy, let's go ahead and start with this. What is action bias?
I would say action bias, in my own layman's terms, would be the belief that doing something is better than doing nothing. In maybe some more specific, official definition terms that I stumbled across from the research that I accessed when I did the article on this a few years ago. I would say the tendency to think that value can only be realized through action, or the tendency to act as opposed to practice restraint when both are reasonable options. So in my terms, doing something's better than nothing. So that belief that sometimes might be false.
Yeah, I think we're susceptible to this even more so in our culture because it's always more is the better mentality.
Yeah.
And when you get that sitting, well, I must not be doing productive. Somebody out there may be doing something more than me, so I need to do something more and react to that. How have you seen this show up in particular with coaches, but then also broader just in basketball?
Okay, starting with coaches, man, I would say tons of ways. I would say with coaches, there's this sort of grinding mentality that every single day I've got to be, watching a new video or watching, learning something from a clinic, or every single day I've got to be, studying or getting better. There's also maybe a tendency to maybe take the result of maybe a game or a bad stretch of games and when in that staff meeting after a loss or a second loss in a row or something, when everyone's frustrated, you're faced with a challenge in that moment of okay, we could make some wholesale changes as a team, as a program, or do we need to switch from man-to-man to zone, or do we need to just totally put in a new offense or something like that? If we refer back to the definition, is do we act or do we practice restraint? So I think that the bias is, as human beings, and especially probably as coaches, we have a tendency toward action when restraint is also an option. No, we could just stick with man-to-man and just get better, or that maybe is the harder choice for coaches, is to take inaction rather than, okay, yeah, we got to do something, because fans and people like that like to associate making adjustments or making big changes as what makes someone a good coach or something like that. That maybe plays into our tendency as coaches to yep, I'm always searching for a solution. I'm always, I'm going to do what, that. That sounds good, but so perhaps just staying the course and getting better and weathering the dips and low points in our performances might be also a viable option.
I see sometimes you hear this too, because this is reinforced by the announcers on television. There needs to be some changes made before the next game, and that knee-jerk reaction can end up being the action bias that creates a change that may not actually address the problem. And I think I saw you in the article address that as well. is we end up then, because of the action bias, addressing something that actually doesn't really have to do with the problem.
Yeah, or we just go deeper and do more. I think there's like a little phrase, it's probably a cliche, but like that I think of when I think of this action bias is like, just because I can do something doesn't mean that I should, or that activity is relevant, right? Like just because I can now with technology, I can watch every single pick and roll where the roller scores like from 5 years back of this team or something like that. Like I have these abilities to do all these things. Does that mean that it's relevant work? Yes, I can make my scouting report 10 pages thicker if I wanted to. Yes, I can watch another hour, 2 hours of film because that exists, that ability is there. But does that mean that's going to have an impact on the outcome of our next performance, right? Like, so I think unproductive busyness is, I think, something we were going to talk about in a moment. I don't mean to steal the thunder, but like that's what I see a lot of times from coaches is like, I just see like, and with the coaches I work with, I was like, they'll tell me, oh, I'm going to go and do this. I go, well, I guess you can, like, if you're bored or just don't have anything else to do, like, I guess you can do that. Like, but like, what does that accomplish? What are you hoping to aim? Or what is the aim of that? What are you hoping to learn or hoping to uncover that we don't already know, So yeah, I think, man, this is a tough one. Like I see this in coaches so much, like they work so hard and really at the end of the day, it's just a way to deal with the fact that in coaching, we're a passive participant. And that doesn't sit well with someone who really wants to win. Like I don't want to feel like a passive participant. So I'm going to do what I can, make my scouting report 10 pages thicker, watch 2 more hours of film. I'm going to do what I can. But like, it's really just like almost like a way to use like energy that you wish you could use another way. Right. Like, but yeah, this is one that's highly prevalent in coaches. I know I mentioned something on Twitter a day or two ago about just sort of like, coaches, tell me your fatal flaw, your Achilles heel. Like, what do you think's holding you back from being the coach you want to be? Like one thing, just to get some ideas of what coaches think about when they're asked that question. And like a couple of the responses kind of had to do with what we're talking about today is like, I can't stop like putting stuff in my head and doing this little work and these little learning projects and things like that. I just can't seem to stop. Yeah, I'm rambling. So go ahead.
You see this just so the coaches are aware of where this can creep in, because as we've said in the other episodes, most of defeating these biases is just simply being aware of where they can potentially impact us and when they can impact us. Would you say that this is something that you see more after losses or after the losing streaks?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like, because like in a way, like it almost feels very logical and very rational to think like, well, we lost, we've got to do something, right? Like we can't just, you get what I'm saying? Like that feels rational and that feels normal. Like why, like, and almost like flabbergasted by, well, you lost the game. You mean you're not going to change or, revamp or but I would say that result is over. Like that result that's over, right? Like that has nothing to do with the next competition, right? Like that result is over. And why would we make a response to a past event in order to tackle a future event? You get what I'm saying? Like that result is finished. So definitely after a loss is when that self-doubt creeps in, and like when the whispers in the stands and from the administration or the media or whatever, like man, they really got to fix this problem, that's when where it becomes a super big challenge to sort of like, oh no, we're fine, we're just not there yet, we'll get there, versus I'm pulling the ripcord and making some wholesale changes. And it seems like, and from the research I've read, that we as humans have a tendency towards, when it's the choice between staying the course, which they would describe as restraint, or taking some sort of action, we tend toward action.
I like this, what you said in the article. Quote was, we tend to think that teams or coaches who are doing the most stuff are creating the most value. Can you kind of talk about that and kind of, again, the thought process behind, for a coach, how that can then impact what they do with their teams?
Yeah, I think that, maybe there's like a tendency like to glorify the coach that does all this stuff, like it takes all these extra steps and makes all these changes, is like, yeah, he's really trying. He's really, that person, or he or she is really like they're doing all they can for their team. But I would argue that the coach is like, no, we're fine. We're just going to go through this. We're not there yet. I know what the end is supposed to look like. We're there. It's not like they're doing nothing for their team either, right? Like they're not happy they lost. They're trying to hold their team to team's feet to the fire. Like, no, I know you can get this done, or I know we will get this done, but we're going through a learning curve and we're not there yet. So I would say both are doing something for their team, and neither is probably better than the other, right? So but it seems like, from outsiders' perspective, and even a coach observing another coach views as like the coach that like made a change, like, yeah, they showed adaptability and they showed flexibility, and that those things do have value and are not to be dismissed. But so does staying the course and like kind of weathering some storms.
As you talk, there's two things that come to mind. The first is the John Wooden quote: "Don't mistake activity for achievement, not of achievement.
Yeah.
Don't mistake activity for achievement," because again, it could be one of those things where the coach is just doing more, and he really is. We can talk about this now, that it's just nothing more than unproductive busyness. And the coach that stays in the office, through midnight, or keeps his staff really late, just because you're there longer, doesn't mean I would argue a lot of times that you're probably just scatterbrained and you don't really have a plan, and you're just grasping for straws.
Yeah, you're just acting on emotion of the moment, right? Like, especially if, like you said, it comes after poor performances, a loss, a short losing streak, or something like that. You're dealing with the emotion and the energy that anger and insult to your ego that losing is, in an unproductive way, like in a way that like doesn't actually address the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree.
I want to move kind of into the solutions and ways that we can avoid this. But I had a conversation earlier this week, actually, on my podcast with Coach Mike Jakacki about defense, and I think that this shows up especially in defense. If we go back and talk about examples, when a coach conveys to a player, we can get better on defense if you just work harder. And so the action is more of just effort. And what ends up happening is you actually avoid, and it may be just the coach doesn't know how to, but like, you're not actually teaching good techniques, whether on an individual level or on a team level. And so the result we don't like, and the solution to that is, in their mind, just give more effort.
Yeah.
That kind of speaks to a bigger point of, we're looking for solutions in the wrong places, can be one of the things that the mistakes that we have when we have this action bias. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think that in the article that I wrote about, and we kind of touched on it, and then we got off track a little bit of things like on the court that where action bias shows up with players and our tactics and strategies. That's Probably one of them. Like the answer isn't always just playing harder. I think in the article I read, I mentioned JJ Barea, formerly of the Dallas Mavericks, who's now retired, who played a year during Luka Doncic's rookie year, talking about the differences between Luka and, say, a college player that's come in, that Luka played very smoothly and calmly and like with knowledge, and like he could already read the pick and rolls and throwing those diagonal passes and all of that. And whereas, say, maybe someone from the college game or a guy who's maybe a one and done comes in and all they've heard is just play harder, just go harder. You're not, and they just go harder and they're all rabbit, no turtle. And they're making like tons of mistakes because like nothing, the idea would be that sort of like effort doesn't always outweigh like know-how. Another example I can think of say action bias. I recall watching film with a coach several years ago, and I'm watching film with one of the coaches I mentor, and I get to a possession, and this possession begins very nicely. Like the offense has like really good symmetry. They get to the deep corners. They've got a square top. Like I'm thinking, okay, something good's going to happen here because of this quality that shows up over and over again when I watch film of like when a possession begins with the team, like spaced, balanced. They've found those spots in transition, like usually a good possession, and it gets off on a good start. And I'm watching, and as watching, okay, good. We reverse the ball, and like all of a sudden, bam! This one guy, decides he's going to drive it, and this other guy who just passed it, or some guy that's in front of the drive, they both just sort of cut. And I go, whoa, pause it. And I asked the coach, like, where are they going? Like, what are they doing? What are those two guys that just took off? What are they doing? And his response to me was like, Coach, we just tell our guys, like, always move, never stand. If you're standing, you're wrong. And I was like, ooh, okay, maybe dial that down a little bit, because as you can see right here, the guy had space, the guy had room to attack, and these two guys just cut into the paint and basically defended their own teammate. So I think that's very much an example of action bias, of like this coach felt like he was doing something right by telling his players inaction, i.e. standing, is wrong, and action, i.e. cutting and moving and after you pass always move, is right. But he's unaware that restraint was a good option in that moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like why did you move when the conditions of the court were so favorable to scoring? All the movement did was deteriorate those conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So I really think there's like something in the coach that like thinks that like if my team isn't doing something, we're going to be called lazy, or all they do is stand around, or that coach lets his guys just skate by or whatever. But like that's really silly when you think about the principles of play, mm-hmm. the principles of spacing and timing and movement that need restraint just as much as they need action. That's an example where to me it shows up in tactics, mm-hmm. that is detrimental to the outcome mm-hmm. of at least that possession. And that's something that is maybe a bias or like a fallacy we have in our coaching, is like always moving, always cutting. I know like the Houston Rockets a few years ago when they had James Harden and D'Antoni was the coach, like people like the banter of was, all they do is stand around. Well, they had the most efficient offense in the league that year during the regular season, right? Like they had good. They created good tension in the defense because they spaced three shooters around an action that sometimes required another third player to defend a hardened pick and roll, and they didn't need a whole lot of moving parts in order to score. And to me, the less moving parts that you need that's the less you got to troubleshoot and fix and rehearse. And, that there's an action bias there toward that's not good offense because they're not moving and cutting and screening. But, well, it is when they're scoring 117 points a game, right? Like, so, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good example. Very good specific example. Big picture then, how does a coach, 1, 2, or 3 things, whatever, how does a coach avoid these pitfalls and thus avoid action bias in their coaching?
Yeah, I think, my pat answer has always been first being aware that it exists is a good thing. So if you're listening or if you've read this article, you're already ahead of your competition, and just knowing that, like, all right, there's this thing called action bias, and like I might be susceptible to it. I would say the next thing is just to take a pause and think. Avoid sort of these rash in the moment decisions that come like when our emotions are heightened. Like something as simple as like, hey, we just lost our second game in a row. We're in the coach's office after the game, and we're going to stay up all night on the whiteboard, changing our offense, changing our defense or whatever. And maybe just go home. And if that feels like a good idea to you after the weekend or something, like after that pause, then okay. But like sometimes our heightened emotions and adrenaline and things like that in the moment can cause us to take steps that really don't serve us best long term. That's true in coaching and in life, right? So ask yourself some questions like, does this task that this action that or change we think, does it move us forward? Like is this a better option, or is it just a different option? Is it something better or just something else? Does it at the end of the day, your players are still them. So changing something doesn't really fix what maybe is on a more zoomed out level, the actual problem. Think of your players. Would making a big change like this right now, would it clarify our mission as a program, or would it just confuse our mission? So if I've been preaching all year for seasons, all of a sudden that we're going to be, this type of team and everything is built toward that. And then like I come in after did I clarify that mission statement, or did I confuse it or muddy it? I think when considering a task is just really ask yourself, is this vital? Like, is this actually vital, or is this just misdirected energy? And I think finally, the biggest thing would be, am I as a coach, like what I call giving good coach? I got that expression from Seth Partnow, who's a good writer for the Athletic. He used to be the director of analytics for the Milwaukee Bucks. He's been someone I've been connected with on Twitter for a while. He has a phrase he calls giving good coach, meaning like sometimes as coaches, we just act in a way like an actor playing coach. Like is what I'm doing vital, or am I just giving good coach? Am I just doing what I think people expect of me, making a change when we lost a game, or am I jumping up and yelling because I'm really giving a direction or some sort of directive that is going to help that player or something, or help our performance? Or am I just like play acting, giving good coach? Mm-hmm. And we don't need to do that. Like we need our decisions, our actions should be made to like move us forward or solve an issue.
So these can you kind of relate these to things that we've talked about in the past, and maybe as we finish up here, zoom all the way out and talk about the series as a whole and kind of give us just some summarizing thoughts, because as we've said each week, these are all really interrelated and one can lead to the other. So what do you have in relationship to those relationships, but then also the bigger picture?
Yeah, I would say that like action bias could relate to outcome bias. So we talked about outcome bias being like resulting, like that was a bad shot, calling something a bad shot just because we missed. Well, it might have been a good shot quality, but the outcome wasn't, what we wanted. But like it was a wide open three. That wasn't a bad shot. That was a good decision, but a unfavorable outcome. So like sometimes our outcome bias can lead us to taking action when restraint is also a viable option. So like we take an outcome, a loss or a losing streak or something like that, and that we result from that, like we got to make a change, where actually what we are addressing, like maybe, we got to change from man-to-man to zone defense, for example, just a random example, when perhaps it wasn't even our man-to-man defense that led to the loss. It was the fact that we, scored 41 points or something like that, right? Like, so that we can be persuaded by outcomes that we don't correctly diagnose to take action that we didn't really even need to take. I would say also optimism bias is like, I've got to make a change. We got to wholesale, resell, revamp our whole system because of a loss, could be based on my optimism of thinking my team is better than it actually is. Remember, we talked about like being able to accurately place our team on that continuum of the competitive ladder helps me stay grounded in where we need to be and what we're working on. So like when Northwest Kentucky State goes and plays that non-conference game against Kentucky, right? Like, and they lose it. Do they need to revamp their whole offense? No, they played a team that for a good other reasons, but like that's no, like that was the outcome that was supposed to happen. Like if that guy thought they had a chance to beat Kentucky, like he needs to go watch a Kentucky practice a couple, times to get like, no, these guys look different than my guys. Like there's no reason to knee jerk to this outcome. We're getting something else out of this game. Mm-hmm. So being able to accurately place your team up against another team without giving your team like a couple of bonus points because they're your team, that optimistic view we want, we're too emotionally attached to it, can help us stay in the moment when it comes to making restraint or action decisions. And I would say, lastly, what you asked me to do is just sort of summarize the project and what we've been talking about this summer. I would just refer back to my motive for writing them in the first place. Like, I'm not a behavioral scientist. I'm supremely unqualified to comment on this, at least in an academic setting. But I have studied it and I did do research for these articles. But, again, my motive for doing it was conversations that I have with coaches, like hearing their reasoning and their rationale behind decisions or their outcome, their viewpoints, and was starting to hear, and I was starting to hear things, and it was really starting to sound like a bunch of emotional babies, right? Like reacting out of nothing but emotion, which led to illogical, irrational, unsubstantiated reasoning for doing things they're doing with their teams, and it was getting them nowhere. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't have written these 5 or 6 articles if I didn't feel like that they served a purpose to help, and that purpose is for coaches to become better thinkers, better decision makers.
Yeah, it's allowed me to really kind of dig deeper and the reason why things are the way they are, be realistic, to pay more attention to data, because data just reflects what's actually happening, and then making decisions based off of that are realistic and address the problems that actually matter, has been what this has helped me with. Good. Let me say one thing here, just real quick, last thing before we wrap up. But we do want to thank our sponsors over at Sideline Interactive for partnering with us here at Hoops Forum. If you're wanting to improve the look of your gym, maybe raise some additional revenue, these scoreboards and scorers tables are incredible ways to go about doing that. To find out more, just simply visit sidelineinteractive.com and they can set you up with those scores tables and scoreboards. Appreciate all of those who watched the show this week. If you missed any part of the live show, you can go back and watch or listen to any part. Just to visit, you can visit Radius Athletics on their YouTube page to watch those episodes, or you can listen by searching a Quick Timeout podcast. You'll find the full version of those audio sessions there. Really appreciate Randy and all his work that he did for this. By the way, you can go back and read these articles that he's been referring to on the Fast Model website and also on his website. And in addition to that, they've been linking these videos into those articles there at Fast Model, so you can read those in the blog sections and go back and watch those as well. Randy, really appreciate all of your work that you did with this.
Thanks, man. It's been a great conversation. I hope coaches got out of it something that will help them sort of think clearer.
Yeah, for sure. I have, that's for sure.
Good.
Thank you to all those that have watched. We'll talk to you again next week on Hoops Forum.